Hey everyone, it's the Nitty Professor, and it strikes me that now is a good time to look at fiber crafting, yarn, knitting, wool, etc. in the very large and significant country of Iran. You know, when you other people, it's a lot easier to drop bombs on them. But when we do the opposite and we examine our similarities, then it makes it a lot harder. And it makes peace a lot more easy to attain. So I thought trying to delve not terribly deeply, but at least a little bit into Iranian culture with regard to fiber crafting, wool, and the like would be useful, especially in this time. And as I said, it's a big country. Now I have my information from a variety of sources, probably not going to be the most coherent coverage of this topic because it's huge, right? Fiber crafting has been around in Persia for millennia. I think there are examples going way back of things such as braiding, something akin to nail binding. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Nail binding. Weaving is very big. Carpets. Carpets are probably the biggest fiber crafting industry in Iran, in Persia. You talk about Persian carpets all the time. And obviously I'm not going to cover the entire history of Persian carpets here. But I thought it was kind of interesting to look at knitting specifically and then sort of like what do they do besides knitting and the position of the different fibers. So this is just sort of a sketch to consider that and just to sort of focus our minds on Iran as a place where there are fiber crafters just like you and me. So yeah, knitting is not like huge in Iran. It certainly exists. It's a big country. Like say we've got, Tehran is a big urban area. So there is such a thing as, knitting and crochet, like what Westerners like myself would be accustomed to and influencers in this kind of thing and yarn. But it's probably significantly less of a big deal than it would be, say, in a North European country. So, making sweaters, making hats. I watched a video or two. There was a video of a woman who was making, hats and I think mittens. I think some kind of slippers, for sale. And, it's an appealing hobby. So you're going to find it all over the entire world. But carpet weaving and there are also like regional textile traditions that are much bigger than anything that would resemble sort of, the Western knitting appeal, that like what I'm attracted to. Fiber work is traditionally very much associated with women in Iran, especially in more of your rural setting where raising sheep and goats and other, like, I think even camels is typical. Skills are often taught within families and through formal hobby communities. I don't really know a lot. Like, you think about Europe back in the day, they had guilds, right? So it had really formal ways. I mean, heck, you can still earn like a knitting guild certificate here in the States. I think it's really hard from what I've heard. So, there's probably that kind of thing going on. Don't know anything in detail about the tradition, but it's probably deeply entrenched. In cities, you'll probably see more of knitting as like the modern hobby of what, I'm practicing, and it's global, right? It's influenced by global craft trends. I mean, it's probably, for all I know, it's probably influenced by Etsy, and YouTube and, whatever. I know the access to the internet's very limited over there, especially now. But, to the extent that there is, global penetration of influencers, crafting, and that kind of thing. In the cities, probably more likely to find, what we would sort of consider knitting and crochet. But in the nomadic context, in a rural context, fiber is economic survival, really. It's an inherited culture, growing wool and weaving and making carpets and that kind of thing. So knitting is there, but it's not like the centerpiece, right? Even something like weaving would be a much older type of crafting from fiber in the context of Iran. Now, interestingly, so yarn is really big in Iran. In fact, I think I read again, I'm going to link some articles. There are over 102 major mills for, I believe, wool alone. They also produce cotton, and they produce a lot of synthetic fibers. So Iran has a big oil industry, and consequently, they make a lot of synthetic fiber, which is pretty interesting. So there's a long-standing tradition of natural fibers of nomadic sheep, goats, which is like the backbone of their fiber industry. They use wool, they use goat hair, and some of these are specific to ethnic groups. For example, Kurdish and tribal textiles may use goat hair more necessarily than wool. And there are certain examples of textiles that they would be using. I don't know a lot about them, apart from carpets, but there's something called the yayim, which uses wool and cotton, and a textile called the verni kilim, which uses wool blended with goat hair. And a lot of these animal fibers are hand spun and naturally dyed, which is really cool. So there's a long-standing tradition of hand spinning as well as weaving. Cotton is also big in Iran. Iran produces about 70,000 tons of cotton annually based on what I have been able to dredge up. And that covers a good significant portion of their own domestic demand. They import the rest. I even read that they import some wool from Germany, which I found kind of interesting. So it'd be interesting to, to follow up with that and see to what extent that's true, if that's just a blip or whatever. But there again is a major industry in synthetic fiber, polyester, acrylic, even viscose, and it has to do with the petrochemical sector in Iran. So they produce tens of thousands of tons annually of this kind of fiber, with I think in total well over 200 spinning wheels with a large scale output. It'd be interesting. I didn't take the time to do this, but it'd be really interesting to try to chase down some pictures of some of the mills and see what they're like. I've seen some in India, as far as like videos and that kind of thing. Huge amount of yarn production, somewhere in the neighborhood of 300,000 tons per year, based on a website from glyarn.com. So there's a lot of locally spun wool and factory-made yarn, and for high-end and urban markets, there is a place for imported fibers. Now, I also read that cashmere is grown in Iran, but they don't, according to my information, they don't have the mills to produce cashmere in the form of thread or yarn for, making whatever. And according to what I read, this is a significant economic loss for the country, that if they could not only raise the cashmere, but also produce it, they would benefit economically, like Mongolia. I think Mongolia has an interesting situation too, where, they don't necessarily have all the technology to mill the cashmere or the yak, for example, but they certainly can raise it. So that raises an interesting kind of conundrum with regard to, introducing technology into nomadic culture and exploitation, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to imagine that because of all the sanctions against Iran, there are a lot of limitations on, interest in, more technologically sophisticated societies in making that kind of investment. According to my reading, a lot of the trade that is done between Iran and other nations is like with Azerbaijan or United Arab Emirates and those kinds of places. So as far as the bigger picture, like the textile picture, that's something that I can only sort of look at very sketchily in this context, but I think it would be interesting to delve into in greater detail. And if you know more than I do, please, please, please share it. There's a lot of textile work as identity, and arguably is like cultural, like narrative storytelling that involves patterns and motifs that carry like tribal identities. I don't know a whole lot about that, but also regional symbolism and spiritual and historical meaning. Now, I am no expert on the ethnic divisions in history in Iran. I know there are Kurds there because we've heard about them. And I know there's a Muslim split. I don't know a whole lot about that either. I should learn more. But I have run across this word tribes on a fairly regular basis in some of these articles that I have looked at. So it would be interesting to know more about that, and, to examine like the relationship between these tribes and, say, geometrical motifs, animal motifs, symbolic motifs, this kind of thing. It's also a long-standing historical continuity from the standpoint of nomadic life and agrarian economy. And, Persia goes back so far. A civilization that has existed for a long time with a lot of embedded traditions that have been carried forth, even with regard to like the seasons and seasonal rhythms and that kind of thing. And I ran across some examples. For example, there's the Kurds have a shawl and garment production where they make shawls with goat wool and traditional methods. It'd be interesting to know more about that. And again, the null binding techniques in these kinds of shoes. And of course, I might be pronouncing it wrong. Null binding. Actually, I was just writing about that. There's a little segment in book 3, which is about to come out, y'all, about that craft. It just gets mentioned in regard to the Vikings. But they were using in Iranian culture, from what I can tell, to make a kind of shoe. So this is a craft that predates knitting. It's one that I want to learn. So knitting is, again, exists, but not in a really pronounced way alongside other more pronounced, fiber crafts, textile work. Textiles are a significant industry in Iran. A lot of small garment producers exist in rural areas where they supplement their income by making various garments, and often it's done in the home. And in some regions, there are entire communities that specialize in textile crafts. It almost makes me wonder if there are, quote unquote charity groups that exist that work with women. I've seen it like in Nepal and in maybe some South American countries, especially among Christians. I don't know if that exists in Iran or not, but it'd be interesting to see, to sort of build on that textile tradition and make it more marketable. So there are, from what I read, entire textile communities that specialize in making things that can be sold, but they suffer because of sanctions, global competition, and lack of technology. So yes, there are tons and tons of mills in Iran. We don't know what the quality is. I don't know, maybe they're very high tech. I know some of the ones in Turkey are very high tech, but yeah, the global competition is going to be such that in order to really compete with the output of, anything from Canada to Australia, there would have to be certain conditions in place. And sanctions generally aren't one of those conditions that you want to have in place to raise the profile of your fiber ecosystem, including yarn. As far as modern knitting culture, it exists to the extent that there is any access to social media, which right now is sharply curtailed, as we know, but to the extent that it does exist, or, there might be any kind of back and forth, give and take between Iran and other countries, which there is, there's going to be imported yarn, they're going to come across Western style patterns, and there might be, and I haven't looked this up, but I would be really curious, have you ever gone to a yarn shop in Tehran, for example? That'd be pretty interesting. There are small yarn shops, according to what I've seen in the cities, and online communities, and a lot of use of synthetics in Iran because it's affordable, and again, it's an industry there that is fairly prolific. So you're not going to find large-scale knitting cultures, fiber festivals, the way that we think of them, etc., etc. It's a different culture. It's just a different culture. As far as, I was looking up wool, because wool obviously interests me a lot. I did not look up information on cotton. I did not specifically look up information on synthetics, but I was really interested in the history of wool in Iran because I had to assume it was kind of a big deal. And turns out that it is. It's been around for thousands of years for manufacture of clothing, blankets, hats, and huge carpets and rugs, but also useful for making tents, saddlebags, ropes, and even animal gear, harnesses and this kind of thing. Over the history of Iran, it's been quite rich in wool resources with regard to other countries. There are certain countries where wool is bigger than in other countries, and it was definitely a huge survival material resource. And from what I can tell, it continues to be so today, especially, again, with regard to the carpet industry. And it's connected to nomadic culture. We see that again in Mongolia and even in South America to a degree. Pastoral life is highly connected, and I've run across some names like the Bakhtiari or Kashkai. They rely heavily on sheep and goats and raising animals, shearing wool, spinning it, and using it locally. So it's like an inherent part of the local economy. And some of the nomads can actually be engaged in managing national flocks. So a lot of the flocks in Iran would be very large, and nomadic peoples would herd them. There is such a thing as seasonal sheep shearing, and it sort of has a cultural rhythm to it, which is tied to the migration patterns and also obviously to climate. It's like an inherent part of land use and of traditional knowledge as it is handed down. So as far as textile art and wool, again, I'm running across this word kilim, which is something that is related to carpets, very wool-based. The wool that is raised in Iran tends to be very durable and coarse, and especially suited to carpet weaving. So you wouldn't necessarily look for wool from Iran and then, make a sweater from it. That is less likely scenario. It's also used a lot in felted goods and in tribal textiles. It almost reminds me just a little bit of what I know about Navajo culture and their weavings, and how important that is, like the blankets and the the tent hangings, wall hangings, floor coverings that are made from traditional motifs from spun and woven wool. So these are decorative textiles, but they also play an important role in encoding like regional identity, and they have a lot of symbolic import and almost a kind of a storytelling power. So they're utilitarian, but they're also artistic in the traditional collective way of being art, not like, me just randomly putting rabbits or octopus on my sweater. It's something that would be handed down that will help you to relate to the people around you and build cultural identity. It's like a material language that helps Iranians to express their own visual culture. Economically, wool is important. From what I've seen, livestock in general accounts for 30 to 40% of Iran's agricultural output, so that's very significant. And sheep are the most important livestock species, not just for their wool, but also obviously for food. So sheep is a huge contributor to rural income, to employment, to food security. And a lot of the livestock economies are more integrated and collective than they would be in, a capitalist, more traditionally capitalist country like ours. But according to the Helgi Library, about 50,000 tons of wool has been produced annually in Iran in recent years. I don't know how many sheep that is, but it sounds like a lot. And actually, Iran ranks among some of the top wool producing countries globally. So I think Australia is really high up there, and China, but it might rival like Turkey. Again, Iran is a really big country. It's bigger than Germany. So it's very significant. Over 100 industrial wool spinning mills, not just spinning mills, but just specifically wool spinning mills. There's a large cottage sector. And again, it informs carpet manufacturing as well as garments and household textiles. And it sort of builds a bridge between pastoral tradition and modern industry with all those mills. As far as export, there are limitations, right, because of the position of Iran's government. They do have high-value fibers such as cashmere and goat wool, but as I mentioned, they don't necessarily finish those fibers off in country. They export the raw materials, thereby losing a lot of money because they can't actually go from raw material to finished product within their own economy. Major exports, that wool has also informed, obviously, would be Persian rugs. The carpet industry today is suffering from these global circumstances, sanctions, competition, and declining exports. I'm not sure who all is buying wool carpeting. I came very close to buying a wool rug a year or two ago, and I was so afraid of moths that I didn't do it. I asked the salesperson, can you guarantee me I won't get moths? They're like, no. I was like, gosh darn it. So don't want moths to infect my sweater collection. So, I mean, Turkish rugs, Persian carpets, they're still a thing. They're still big, but I don't know, how big they are compared to like 50 years ago or 25 years ago. It would be an interesting question to answer. Environmentally speaking, so I've done a podcast before where I talked about the importance of sheep for the ecology globally. A lot of Iran is semi-arid, and obviously you're not going to raise a whole lot of crops in climate like that. So sheep and goats can thrive in this kind of climate where crops cannot. Now, I guess they grow a lot of cotton. Cotton, from everything I can detect, does do fairly well if you have enough water bringing in a hot climate. But yeah, so sheep and goats are really great for the ecology of a country like Iran, and almost function as a kind of ecological adaptation strategy, which is important. So wool is a way of making marginal land productive. It's a way of increasing the productivity of the land, which is very arid in Iran. In my kind of thinking, wool is something I look for at a high-end store so that I can turn it into something that I keenly desire at a very individual level. But in Iran, wool is sort of like it's almost like clothing or housing. It's just something that you have. It's something that's there. It's something that people generally raise, and the culture can grow out of that, and it can undergo a lot of transformation in the process and like individualization as far as like regional cultures and aesthetics. And that holds true as well for the kind of sheep. Now, if you look at something, it'd be interesting. I'm not going to do it here, but to go into like weaving specifically in Iran, I think it would be really interesting, because I just have to imagine there's huge history, goes back very far, lots of different techniques, lots of sophistication, and lots of interesting variations on the theme from region to region. Especially when you add in the whole idea of like natural dye, which I also read in one article, is, hand spinning goes along with natural dyes, and there's a lot of lore and history tied to that. So as far as sheep, I was kind of interested in some of the breeds, and I got some names here. I'm not sure how interested you are in them, but I'll just name a couple. There's a sheep called the Baluchi, Baluchi, which is in eastern Iran, which is a very dry region. And I saw the word fat-tailed mentioned a lot with regard to these sheep, even throughout the country. Apparently it's prevalent in desert regions. And it's a very drought-resistant sheep. The wool it produces coarse. The fibers are very strong. And I guess a sheep can produce a couple of kilograms in fleece annually. So that's one breed that works really well in Iran because it thrives in harsh and arid landscapes. In addition, the wool is useful for carpets in particular, as well as saddlebags, utilitarian weavings, and even tent bands. There's a kind of sheep, it's called the classic carpet wool sheep, and it's Mehraban, Mehraban, which is in more western Iran, and it's used mainly for meat, but also culturally important for wool. Has a light brown wool, and is specifically designated as carpet wool quality according to my resources, so it's used a lot in Persian carpets and heavy woven goods. There are also Kurdish breeds, the Khorasan breed, Saraksi breed. This wool, again, is known for its quality with specific regard to making carpets. It's often a white color, and often used for tribal textiles with complex dye work. The Maku sheep, Makou, in the region near Azerbaijan, which is a country that I would be very interested in visiting sometime, and has use in weaving in particular and everyday textiles. Then there's the Karakul sheep, which I like hearing about because I have some Karakul wool in the other room, which I have washed and carded, and all I need to do is spin it. So there's my little connection. I do have some Persian wool in hand in my house, and that makes me really happy. The uses are fur garments, so I guess the skins are used, and it's more known for the pelts, so we'll see how it actually spins up, because according to the information I'm getting, it's less important for spun wool. The Afshari sheep, I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's primarily used for meat, but it has a nice coarse wool that can be used in textiles, utilitarian textiles. So the best wools in Iran are designated for carpets. They have strong fibers, they're coarse fibers, they take dye well, and they're also known for aging into a really nice patina. And the carpet tradition in Iran would not exist without these local sheep and their wool. So it's pretty important. There are other textiles, or something called flat weaves. I didn't look into it. I don't know a whole lot about it. You might know more than I do. Kilims belong into this category with decorative patterning and structure. Goods that are made for nomads, like saddles, tents, blankets, bedding, ropes. They're also made with wool, and outer garments may be more felted, like cloaks. I've seen that a lot in Hungarian traditions in my research. So there's not so much in the way of like fine knitwear or this kind of thing. I suppose when things calm down, if I was to go to Iran, just being curious about their fiber culture, I probably would tend more to explore the carpets, and wool that is specifically made for that. I might be less interested in the synthetic yarns, but apparently that is a big deal just because of their petrochemical industry. So that's some of what I found. It's a really interesting topic. Again, if you know more than I do, which is very likely because I've sort of gone to half different sites here. I'll link them for you. Again, it's so easy to throw bombs at people that you don't get, that you other. And I think the less we do of that, the better. So I thought this is really a great opportunity. I have known people from Iran over the years, not a whole lot, but certainly back when I was growing up in the 70s, the Shah of Iran was like this big deal. And of course, that was from my American perspective. From the Iranian perspective, it was probably a big deal in a not so good way. And there are quite a number of Iranians who I have met over in the States, but I have not really gotten to know Iranian culture very well. So this is my tiny little window onto it. And I look forward to seeing what you guys share. And if you want me to dig a little deeper, just give me a nod to do that, because I wouldn't mind learning a little bit more, especially about weaving in particular, and maybe even more details about the wool industry. So you guys take care, and peace out. Ciao.